Now, if you don't like this video, I hope you'll stay subscribed and keep watching everything I put out anyways, because maybe something will recontextualize and make this all worth it. Hey everybody, this one's going to be a little bit of an unstructured ramble, which at this point I usually try and keep confined to the break room of Geeks. Subscribe if you're not already. But we are getting into the holidays and I'm still in the middle of editing the novel and I've started on what is going to be one of my bigger video projects. So yeah, you got to cut me a little bit of slack. I want to talk about something that has kind of, it's been on my mind in general for a little while, and it tends to come up really with anything that's a franchise, anything that is long running and is going to theoretically have further installments into the future. So this is your Marvel Cinematic Universes, your DC movies, your Star Wars, your Harry Potters at this point, your Doctor Who's, Star Trek, etc., etc., etc. There's this notion that I see in the fandom that it rides that line between hopeful and harmful. And it's this idea of when something happens that is divisive or unsatisfying or feels incomplete, there is a percentage of fans who basically go, well, maybe it'll get fixed later, or maybe it'll get explained later, or maybe something later will justify this. And I have a lot of issues with that as a general mentality. And it's not a mentality that's even confined to films, comic books, or TV. Because it's the same root mentality that basically lets video game developers release a broken product with the hope that they will patch it later and fix it. I mean, and they've actually built business models around that. That's what the entire live service concept with video games is, but I'll try not to go on that tangent. Now, let me be clear. I'm not trying to knock or put down anyone who has a mentality of, well, I hope it gets better later. That's an optimism I can totally get behind. If a franchise that you love has gone a direction that you don't like, I think it's a good thing to hope that it becomes something you like again. I've gone through periods of that with a number of things over the years where it's like, okay, at this point, I'm not entirely sure it's working for me, but I hope it will again. That's not what I'm talking about, though. I'm talking about when something happens, be it a plot point, a character turn, or just something that is brought out that just leaves a crap ton of dangling threads with no clear resolution, that people go, well, later. It'll be good later. Here's my fundamental philosophical problem with that. There's nothing wrong with having an eye on the larger picture, the grander franchise, an overarching story, what have you. But if you're going to release an individual piece of media, be it a film, a television show, an issue of a comic book, or what have you, if you're going to release that on its own as a piece of media that we may in some cases have to actually pay for, then that should be satisfying in and of itself. It should not do nothing other than dangle a hook to say, don't you want to see where we go with this? Now, you can have your threads. You can have your things that you use to lure people back for more. But what you give me now still has to work in and of itself. Now, I'll try not to dwell on it too much, but I can't help but think about the new Star Wars trilogy in relation to this. And this was honestly a big part of what got me thinking about it. Although, again, as I said, I see this freaking everywhere. But I remember when The Force Awakens came out and was pretty good. I enjoyed it for the most part. But there were a lot of things that were very deliberately left unanswered. And not in the way that was done in, say, A New Hope, which it took an awful lot of cues from. Because obviously at the end of New Hope, Vader's still around. The Empire hasn't been defeated. They just dealt with the immediate problem. There's a lot of work still to do. There are a lot of places to go for the next installment. But New Hope didn't flatly lay out a bunch of stuff that you're left going, wait, but what? There were vague allusions about Luke's father, but the information you had in A New Hope was enough to have you be satisfied for the purposes of that story. His father was a Jedi, was tutored by Obi-Wan, was killed by Darth Vader. Now, that would get recontextualized later, but for the purposes of that film, that's enough. The Force Awakens, on the other hand, introduces Snoke, who has no context and ultimately would never really get any. It does this massive, blatant laying of Rey's parentage. And regardless of how you feel about where that ultimately went and how it then got backtracked again by Rise of Skywalker, whether or not you like what was done, either in The Last Jedi or Rise of Skywalker with Rey's parentage, you cannot deny that it was something that was blatantly left unsatisfying in that first film. It set up a question and did not even give a hint, a vague thing of an answer. It was just left there. And at the time that it came out, I gave that a pass. I was like, I'm sure they'll pick up on that later. And obviously they did, but I still now consider that a fault of the original film, even separate from the context of what went on with that thing and how it ping-ponged back and forth with what the heck the purpose of that was. Or as another comparative, let's look at the introduction of Thanos into the MCU versus the introduction, or not even really introduction, the hinting at Darkseid in Batman v Superman. Now, Thanos got his initial introduction in a mid-credit sequence in the Avengers. And the reason that works is twofold. One, the immediate situation has been dealt with. As far as what the problems and the issues and the story was for Avengers, we have a complete story. It's why it's in the mid-credits, so that it's there for the people who really care, and people who just wanted a fun ride, they've already left and they haven't really lost anything for that. And we learn enough immediately about him, even though we don't know what his goals are. We don't know how he's going about it. We don't really know who he is, but we know he is clearly the power behind what Loki was doing. So we know he's a threat, and we know he will come up later. But again, immediate situation completely dealt with. Contrast that with Batman v Superman, which had Batman's nightmare sequence. Now, in that sequence, amongst other things that don't really pay off, there's this invasion of parademons, and there's Darkseid's symbol on the ground. This doesn't work for a couple of reasons. The first is it's in the middle of the film, which means that the story is actually paused in order to lay this groundwork that is not going to be paid off in any meaningful way in this film itself, or even really addressed again. Not to mention the fact that it's a symbol that means nothing unless you already know the comics. You could watch the Avengers and see the introduction of Thanos, not know who Thanos is, but still get an idea of what he is about and how he's going to fit into this. That symbol, the Omega symbol for Darkseid, means nothing if you don't already know the comics. And again, you're sticking it in the middle of the film. You are highlighting it. You are making it part of your narrative with no intention of paying it off here. And that's not even getting into the little mini trailers that go on later on in that same film. Again, setting up stuff that in no way pays off in this film. I'm not sure people always understand why I tend to be a proponent on, say, Doctor Who, of the standalone episodes over series arcs. Now, that's not to say every standalone episode is great or that none of the series arc stories are good. There are exceptions in either direction, but my general preference is for a standalone story because I want, at the end of it, to go, yeah, that was nice. Not, okay, I've got one piece of an ongoing story. I hope it's worth sticking with this to find out how it fits together. Because you see, I'm old enough to remember going to see the Matrix sequels in the theater. And going to see Matrix Reloaded and being very unsatisfied by its total non-ending. Even knowing that later that same year, the conclusion was going to come out because they'd already shot it. So it wasn't like, oh God, I hope they get a sequel. No, they had one. There was no question there, but it still wasn't all that satisfying because it didn't allow me to feel like I had a complete experience. I had half an experience. And whether or not that half was going to be worth it was going to be completely dependent on whether or not Revolutions was any good, which it's okay. It's overhated. But, realizing that these are part of the same whole story ends up bringing Reloaded down a bit in my estimation because it doesn't stand on its own. And the idea of we'll fix it later, well, maybe you will, but maybe you'll also drag it down later. In many ways, studios and directors and creators kind of bank on the idea that audiences will go, well, maybe this will pay off later. Maybe they'll fix this thing that they brought up and doesn't quite make sense yet later. They bank on that. Again, to come back to Star Wars, I didn't mean to keep coming back to that so much, but J.J. Abrams very deliberately built that mystery in with the idea that it would keep people coming back. But if you make a good Star Wars movie, we're going to come back for more. You don't need to lay that stuff in. And the fact that this whole, but this will all pay off later. That was a huge part of why the Dark Universe, Universal's Dark Universe, The Mummy completely collapsed in on itself because major swaths of it were nothing but setups for stuff that was supposed to happen later. But nobody was satisfied with the movie. That wasn't the only problem with that movie. There's a lot of problems with that movie. But the fact that fans are so forgiving about an individual piece of media in a franchise that they like, it lays the groundwork for people behind those franchises to take advantage and to string you along on the hope that it'll be worth it in the end. But I don't want a story that hinges 100% on whether or not the ending works. Because, well, honestly, that's what happened with Game of Thrones. I didn't realize it at the time. I don't think most of us did. But that story, because it is a continual narrative, and it's not episodic really in any way, shape, or form, the whole series was going to hinge on sticking the landing because that's what all of this stuff that we'd been enjoying was building towards. And when it didn't, and when it sucked, because honestly, that last season sucks. It makes it hard to go back and even enjoy the good seasons again because everything is building towards that terrible last season. Things don't stand on their own. They don't have satisfaction as a standalone piece because we kept getting strung along every step of the way going, ooh, they're going to pay it off. Ooh, and again, I'm not saying that they shouldn't make things like Game of Thrones. I mean, if they stuck the landing, maybe I'd be listing it as the exception of how to do it right. But just be careful about having your optimism turned into making excuses for a piece of media that doesn't actually satisfy in and of itself. Because the teasing, the anticipation, the, ooh, this is going somewhere, that's fine and all. But it's foreplay. Try not to let creators get away with doing nothing but foreplay and never actually getting the job done, so to speak. So that's going to wrap up this one, folks. I don't have a sponsor for this video, but I do want to shout out a Kickstarter, which, full disclosure, I am friends with the person running it, and I am already a backer on it. But I really want to see this thing succeed. My friend Hi-Ho Silver, who is an artist, a burlesque performer, and just an all-around really great person, on their TikTok earlier this year, they pitched this concept of a new take on the Joker, a black female anti-hero Joker. And go to the Kickstarter, you can hear the pitch.
And her main thing is just like, if only you smiled, it wouldn't be so threatening if you smiled.
They have paired with an artist who could help make it happen. It's a brilliant concept that I want to see through to the end. And I think if you go to the Kickstarter, link in the description, and check out the pitch video, I'm pretty sure some of you are going to want to see this too. So that's what I'm going to recommend for you in lieu of any kind of sponsor this week. I hope that if you celebrate Thanksgiving that you had a wonderful one, and I hope that things are going okay for you going into December. Thank you for watching. Usual stuff, like, share, subscribe. I have a Patreon. That is what pays my bills and keeps this entire operation up and running. And I appreciate absolutely any amount of support that is given through that, but you also don't have to. End of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.